I try to look at the positive side of things, folks. I like to find any kind of bright spot I can, the silver lining around the cloud, even though we talk all the time about stuff on this show, about things that are going bad, decisions that are being taken that are dumb, things that just don't make any sense at all, but we still try to wrap it around. Well, there's this positive thing here, and there's maybe if we go down this path, things can improve, etc. But man, that is getting harder and harder to do. And when I take a look at what the strategic thought is in America, the so-called political elite, the so-called foreign policy elite of any kind in this country, especially with the international relations and the Pentagon, no one can come away with this with anything except great trepidation. And it's hard to see where there's the silver lining on this one, because when you see the decisions that are being made at the very top and the absolute absence of understanding of how things work at the elemental level, we're not talking here about, some kind of PhD level stuff that you have to really nook and cranny and figure it all out and only decades of, it's not like that. The reason why our channel is so successful and why so many people flock to it is because it's stuff that's put in normal human being language that you can get. It's stuff that's understandable. And when you take a look at the news and the events of the day, they make sense when you talk about them in a rational way. That's what we do. And when I look at things in that light and convey them here, especially what I'm about to share with you, it just drives me crazy. And I'm sure it probably does you too. And why our elite can't seem to get it is baffling, I'll just say. What got me started here today, what's got me so fired up, there's a number of things, but let's start with the Washington Post. This was out yesterday. This is the Washington Post editorial board. Now, this is not just somebody who wrote an op-ed, and sometimes papers, they'll put in a number of different people and you have different views, etc. This is what they consider the policy opinion of the Washington Post editorial board, the so-called best minds in the Washington Post, which is one of the two elite papers in all of the United States that everybody keeps looking to for guidance on complicated issues. They have that reputation. They've earned it over really centuries. Well, I don't know about centuries, certainly many, many decades. And that's where they sit at the moment. One has to wonder what in the hell is wrong with these people. So Trump, as according to what they said last night, Trump should recommit to Ukraine's cause. According to the policy board team, they wrote, quote, Hegseth and his team have once again poorly served the nation, embarrassing the president and projecting lack of resolve to Russia. The best corrective would be for Trump to recommit the United States to Ukraine's cause, ramping up arms shipments to Kiev rather than just restoring U.S. support to pre-existing levels. Investing in Ukraine's fight, drawing a large country into the West orbit and deterring future Russian aggression is well worth substantial sacrifice of U.S. material, more than the United States is now providing, enough to improve Ukrainian performance on the battlefield. Gary, I'm going to ask you to bring this up and down a few times as we go through here, because I'm going to address a number of things here. But let's look at the first one there. Gary, if you could keep it up there you go. He said, this is, by the way, in response to the United States, and we showed you this a week ago, Monday, where we paused the shipments of interceptor missiles and 155 millimeter artillery shells and a number of other categories of things that were important to the Ukraine's fight, for sure. We talked about how it was important to America's national defense as well, and we thought it was a good idea on this show here. But now that it just created this big uproar, and then over the week, President Trump got upset because Russia was increasing its air attacks onto Ukraine and all of this. That's what prompted this here. And that's what they're referring to when they say Hegseth has served the nation poorly. And to be fair, this is the third time in the Trump administration that there was a pause in support to the Ukraine side, and the third time that they have gone back on it. Almost, if that's all we wanted to talk about, we could say, what in the hell? What is going on here when you have apparently somebody in the Pentagon, whether it was Hegseth or some others, and there's various accounts of who actually gave the authority to pull this off. They look at the amount of ammunition we had, our stockpiles, and said these key areas, this is not going to work. We're going to put a pause on it. And then 3 times it went back and pulled it off. So it's like we're schizophrenic. Either the stockpiles are low or they're not. Either it's a good idea to give weapons to Ukraine or it's not, but to keep going back and forth and back and forth. Folks, that's going to make even the best of ally go and scratch their head and think, who's in charge over there? And where is their mind? So that's number one. Unfortunately, that's kind of low down on the priority list. There are bigger issues that are embedded in that article. If you can bring it back up again, Gary. They say, according to Washington Post, the best corrective would be for Trump to not just to take the pause off, but to ramp up arms shipments to Ukraine. Now, you got to ask, where is the logic here? Well, upon what do you base this recommendation, editorial board for the Washington Post? Because we've done this already. You may recall, and I know this is ancient history to many, and a lot of people don't do history, but go with me all the way back to the year 2023. You may recall that beginning at the end of the previous year, Ukraine had two big successes on the battlefield, and that got everybody excited in the West and said, hey, maybe Russia can lose. I argued at the time that was not the case. Others also did, to include Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, said, no, this is the best time to negotiate. You won't get a better time because you're in the ascendancy and you have a position of strength and some leverage, but the Russian side is down, but they're not out. And if you give them time, they're going to recover. So that should have been the case there, but it wasn't. So instead, everybody said, yay, maybe Russia can be beaten after all, because their knowledge of war is this thick or thin, and maybe more like this thin. Okay, it's more like this piece of paper right here. That's about how thick and deep our understanding is of international relations and war at the cumulative West level, the so-called elite, poorly named elite, if I can add that in there. So they said, look, let's give them everything. The Biden administration was the lead cheerleader on this. All the European powers were lined up behind it, cheerleading to, throwing everything they could get rid of out of their arsenals. There were thousands of armored vehicles from the United and military vehicles of all sorts from the United States alone, hundreds and hundreds of others, and some of the best stuff from the Western European nations, like the Challenger tanks, Leopard tanks, AMX-10s from France, etc. Lots of self-propelled howitzers, towed howitzers, rocket launchers, long range, mid-range, all kinds of stuff. Training, intelligence support, everything. We gave, just lock, stock, and barrel. Virtually everything that was asked for, they got. Millions of shells, hundreds of millions of ammunition of all sorts. Not making any, these are not exaggerations. These are actual numbers. And in some cases, it's even higher. I believe it was 500,000 by January of this year had gone over half a billion, 500 million rounds of various types of ammunition. Just a staggering number. All that was given in 2023 for Ukraine to try and push Russia out. They utterly, completely failed. Since November of 2023, the Ukraine side has been on the back foot. And Russia has been methodically chewing away the Ukraine military, methodically destroying cities, methodically taking territory. And now then here, since about March of this year, every single month, you see the amount of territory the Russians are taking accelerate. You see the casualties being suffered by the Ukraine side accelerate. So with all of those facts that are known, that are not hidden. It's not like super top secret squirrel kind of stuff that only a handful of people know. This is out there in the open. You have satellite imagery on civilian that's out there, and it tells you everything that you need to know. That's how we get our stuff. That's how we're aware, because we have access and stuff. It's just amazing the amount of information that accessible to regular civilians today that used to be only the purview of the top secret of the intelligence communities of various countries. But because of communications means the way it is, because of now civilian satellites, YouTube videos that are openly shared by both armies. We really have good visibility on what's going on the ground. And if I'm just a retired lieutenant colonel, mid-level guy, never got even up to full colonel, if I can figure this out, anyone can, who's allegedly smarter than me, can figure it out too. And yet here you have the Washington Post, the so-called elite newspaper of the United States of America, is saying things like this. And then we go on down there. Investing in Ukraine's fight, drawing a large country into the West orbit, and deterring future Russian aggression is well worth the substantial sacrifice of U.S. material. Okay, let's camp on that for just a second here. Investing in Ukraine. Here, put that back up one more time. That phrase there that I didn't highlight in the second paragraph. Investing in Ukraine's fight, drawing a large country into the West orbit, and deterring future Russian aggression. Folks, that's called a bumper sticker. That's just a slogan. It has no substance to it at all. Investing in Ukraine's fight. Listen, I just painted the picture that shows you it's over. It's over. There is no fight. It's a matter of how fast Ukraine's going to lose or how slow they're going to lose. You can drag it out a little bit of time, a medium amount of time, or it could even go into a long time, maybe another year or two even. It's possible. I doubt it, but it's possible. The Ukraine side has shown great resiliency, but it's only that they have delayed the inevitable outcome, because the fundamentals that go into making war, which used to be so well known at the elite level in the United States and in the Western world writ large, is now gone, because they keep making statements like this, that we need to invest in their future. And then throw it back up there, Gary. And then drawing a large country in the West orbit and deterring future Russian aggression. Okay, those two are just laughable. Draw a large destroyed country into the Western orbit? Why do I want that in my orbit? That's going to be an economic sucking sound for the indefinite future for the West, if they retain any of it, because there's going to be so much reconstruction that has to be done. They've gutted their whole generations of people. So it's going to be really hard to even sustain, because the population, so many of them have left, and especially the young men, have been destroyed. So now then you're going to have a hard time even keeping the population alive once the war is over. And there's all these issues about PTSD, about just medical care that's going to be just inflicted on millions of Ukrainian men after the war is over. There's very little thought been given to that. Why do you want to draw that into the Western orbit? And then the last part there on that triumvirate, that we want to deter future Russian aggression. Okay, everything that we have done since, 2007, actually you can go back to 1997, when we've been advancing NATO up to the Russia's border, and then starting in 2007, they expressly warned that it was a red line to go NATO into Ukraine, and then they finally acted on it. So if you want to deter Russia, just stop advancing to their border. They have never shown any indication of being an expansionist power, which we always throw on them. We always put that tag on them, even though the evidence screams the opposite. They just want to be left alone. They don't need to invade anybody else. They have all the natural resources they can handle. They don't want to collect a bunch of nations that despise them and have to garrison people on there, which are going to constantly be certainly attacked in terrorist activities just indefinitely with partisans, etc. Everyone knows that. The Russians know it. They're not going to want to grab that because they can't keep it. They can't keep it at a cost-effective level anyway, and they don't need it. So there's no reason to think that they're just going to go on this conquering spree anyway. So if you want to deter them, though, the best way to do it is not to keep a war alive here, because all that's going to do, and especially when they see the West continuing to expand its military arsenals and doing this rebuild Europe situation, 5% on every NATO country increase, whatever, putting troops in German troops right now in the Baltics. All that tells Russia is to continue to build up, and you have the security dilemma. We talk about that a lot. One side goes up, they have this level of building and spending, and then the other side wants to match it. Now, well, I want to deter it, so I'll go a little bit higher. Oh, wait, look, they went up. That's what I'm talking about. So if you want to deter Russia, don't keep giving them a reason to build up. Just defend yourself. Just provide reasonable national security on the border with Russia. If you're worried about them, fine. Defend yourself. That's what every country is supposed to do. I heartily recommend that. So I'm absolutely not saying disarm or anything weird like that. No, be strong. Build up a strong national defense. Many of these countries should be increased because they have relied on the United States-led backstop, which was actually a front stop for decades now. So I'm all for them increasing their national defense, but do so. Very fair enough. Just don't do so in ways that says, yeah, we're going to keep building up to have an offensive capacity because we expect to fight a war with them, because then, well, you know where that's going to go. And nothing that we have done since 2022 has deterred Russia. So why do you think, Washington Post board, that giving a few more interceptor missiles, or of course what they're actually asking, let's just be honest about it, they're saying go back to the Biden path. That's what the Trump administration should do. You should just jettison everything that you've said, everything you campaigned on, everything you promised Americans about ending the war. Forget it all and go back to what Biden did and just empty our coffers. And then that last thing on there that they said, even if it costs us substantially, and so that can improve Ukrainian performance on the battlefield. That's the worst line of the whole article right there. There is no improved Ukrainian performance on the battlefield in this war. It's not going to happen. It's way beyond the point to where that's irretrievable losses, because they don't have enough men left to continue to fight. They lose. They are suffering a loss and a shrinking of the Ukrainian army on a month-by-month basis, because the number that they can force mobilize is less than their casualties. So they're getting smaller every single month. Russians are getting bigger every single month. I mean, those things are common knowledge. They're out there for anyone to see. Ergo, no matter what you do, the Russians have the manpower, they have the air power, they have the air defense, they have the industrial capacity to engage in a war of attrition, even at great cost to them, because they have enough in every single category to pay, and you have insufficient in every single category to defend. It is inevitable that at some point math will apply and the Ukraine side will lose. And for you to just have this sentence here to enable Ukraine to better defend itself, that doesn't exist. And you don't even have a clue about it. That's the real problem here. You don't even have a clue, because you just say it with no knowledge that they go. If they had ended that by saying, or they had followed that rather by saying, and here's how that would happen: 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, 7, 8, 9. I mean, you could go down the list if you wanted to paint that picture, but they didn't do any, because there is no logic. There is no path, and they don't even know it. It's like, let's see, who is that? I think Commodore Jeremy has famously said on this channel, and one of the best statements I've heard. He said, the West runs policy based on a narrative or a preference, and Russia bases its policies based on reality. And you see the results playing out in front of you. And this is a graphic representation of that. That this is those are bumper stickers and narrative. We want this to be true. There's no evidence to it, but instead of acknowledging that, I just say, oh yeah, sure there is. If otherwise I'd see it. No, because you've covered your own eyes intellectually. You've covered your brain. I don't know what's going on. But with this being the Washington Post editorial board, which many people look to, especially in the United States, and they think it's accurate because they look in over history where many times, and for a long time, the Washington Post was genuinely that way, because they did have that kind of intellectual capacity, and they were smart and in many cases wise, and they put good information out there. That's not the case right now. Unfortunately, it's not just the Washington Post, because on that issue there about, is it even if it costs us a lot, on NBC News, they put out a piece recently that said Hegseth halted weapons for Ukraine despite military analysis that the aid wouldn't jeopardize U.S. readiness. And according to the article, it says an analysis by senior military officers found that the aid package would not jeopardize the American military's own ammunition supplies. According to 3 U.S. officials, we are not any lower stockpile-wise than we have been in the 3.5 years of the Ukraine conflict, Smith, a ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, told NBC News. Smith said that his staff had, quote, seen the numbers, and without going into detail, that there was no indication of a shortage that would justify suspending aid to Ukraine. So according to the Pentagon officials that NBC News, again, a major news organization in the United States, says, yeah, no, there's no issue at that at all. But then you go to let's see, first of all, it was Ambassador Whitaker a week ago, Monday, said, hey, this is just America first at place, because we have to make sure we take care of ourselves here, strongly implying that he said that there had been an analysis, and then implying that we were getting too low on that, so we have to look for America first. That was followed the next day on July 3rd by Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell, who said this.
The Department of Defense continues to provide the president with robust options regarding military aid to Ukraine, consistent with his goal of bringing this tragic war to an end. And at the same time, the department is rigorously examining and adapting its approach towards achieving this objective, while also preserving U.S. military readiness and defense priorities that support the president's America First agenda. This capability review, and that's exactly what it is, it's a capability review, is being conducted to ensure U.S. military aid aligns with our defense priorities. And we will not be providing any updates to specific quantities or types of munitions being provided to Ukraine or the timelines associated with these transfers. I mean, we see this as a common sense, pragmatic step towards having a framework to evaluate what munitions are sent and where. But we want to be very clear about this last point. Let it be known that our military has everything that it needs to conduct any mission, anywhere, anytime, all around the world. We have the most lethal fighting force in the world. If you need further proof of that, look no further than Operation Midnight Hammer and the total obliteration of Iran's nuclear ambitions there.
Yeah, I bet he doesn't want you to look any further for evidence, because that was a military airstrike, period, full stop, not a war. Because if you say you're the most lethal force on the planet, you've got to be able to fight and sustain large-scale operations against a peer or near-peer adversary a la Russia. And don't look there, because then you're going to find out very quickly that we don't have the capacity to go toe-to-toe. But I digress. This whole comment he made on July the 3rd was in light of the suspension that we had enacted. I believe it was on either late on the night of June 30th or the morning of July 1st. So he was basically validating that we had done this analysis and that we have America first. This is what America first looks like. But don't worry, because we can do everything we want. Well, that wasn't exactly reassuring, but nevertheless, all right, this is why we paused it until President Trump, a couple of days later, decided, let's go ahead and unpause that. Well, The Guardian reported just last night, quite in contrast to what the NBC News reported here, says that the U.S. only has 25% of all Patriot missile interceptors needed for the Pentagon's plan. According to the article, the stockpile of the Patriot missiles has fallen so low that it raised concern inside the Pentagon that it could jeopardize potential U.S. military operation. And Deputy Secretary Stephen Feinberg authorized the transfer to be halted while they review where the weapons were being sent. So who are you going to believe? Who are we listening to? Which of these leaked information? The NBC News one that says, everything's fine. The Guardian here that says you got 25% what you need. And what is the actual truth? I mean, it's like we don't really know what's going on here. So even within the United States, we're sending out incredibly conflicting signals. Now, just looking at the landscape of things that we can see without knowing anything about classified information behind the scenes, we've been supplying Ukraine, other than a couple of 3 pauses of a few days, for 3.5 years, roughly. Okay. And of course, there was a lot before that too, but we'll just keep it during the actual time of the conflict. We've also been supplying Israel with lots of interceptor missiles because of their wars against the Houthis, against the Hezbollah, against the Hamas, of course, which is ongoing, and recently against Iran. So that's a lot of missiles additionally sucked down, because they nearly all come from American production, or American stockpiles. And then here in this latest salvo with this so-called 12-day war, the U.S. physically took part in that in shooting down. So it wasn't just the Israeli side. It wasn't just us giving missiles. We also fired them. That's on top of what we were doing in the Red Sea against the Houthis on our own, where we continued to use a lot of these interceptor missiles. Allah, there have been a buttload of missiles expended in the last 3.5 years, and then doubled up during the Israeli time, and then during this next time, even more concentrated. I'm telling you, folks, according to even open source material, which I have confirmed from those who have access behind the scenes, it's true. We have around 600 interceptor missiles we can produce per year. And one of the things that had President Trump all hot and bothered, and why he reversed this decision, is because Ukraine has been hit by increasingly high numbers of Russian air attacks, both with the drones, especially the Shahed, but also the Kinzhal missiles, several of the other kinds of missiles that Russia has fired. You're talking, last night was the biggest one ever. There was 730 something that were fired. In the 550 a few days before that was then the biggest. And there was 500 and something the day before that, which was then the biggest. Russia continues to ramp this up. A handful of more missiles, folks, is not going to make any difference. Ukraine claimed that they shot down almost everything last night. I'm skeptical. We'll see, because we know for sure on the 551, and Gary has shown you a lot of B-roll over the last week, especially where you see all kinds of Shaheeds going in. Nothing's taking them down, both in the daylight and at nighttime. They're just blowing stuff up left and right. So I'm skeptical that happened. But having a lot of air defense interceptor missiles, by the way, most of the air defense interceptor missiles are for incoming enemy missiles. They're not for Shahed drones. You have to have something else to get that. So the more Russia does this, the more it's going to sap what we have. A handful more is not going to help Ukraine. Period. Full stop. Zero chance that reverses anything. It'll, again, it will probably reduce the amount of missiles that come through, but it's clear Russia has them. Russia's capacity to produce them is way more than ours, especially on the offensive side. So it's not going to make any difference. But what it will do is it will continue to degrade our inventory and our stockpiles, period. It can't be any other way. It's math. We can't produce them at scale like the Ukrainians are wanting to use them. Now, apparently, we're going to send another battery on top of the interceptor missiles. And you just got to think, what is going on here? Who's in charge of the country and in the Pentagon itself? Because there are clearly people in the Pentagon who have the right focus, who are doing the math, who are doing the correct analysis, and are making the right decisions. That's good, but there's too many others, as you see in the contrasting NBC and Guardian articles, which allegedly both talked to Pentagon officials, got a radically different answer. You had the Democrat Smith saying, oh, no, that's fine. I've seen the numbers. Well, then are these guys lying? Was the Undersecretary of Defense just meant Feinberg? Was he lying? Because they can't both be true. So somebody's lying, or they don't know, and they're just making stuff up. That's certainly possible, if not probable. But the bottom line is here, this continues to because of the so-called elite in the West, and whether you're talking about the Washington Post, the President of the United States, the Pentagon, these people have had great reputations and credibility over the time where people listen to them. And that's what's happening in Ukraine right now, as the New York Times pointed out, is that they were optimistic, hopeful, but cautious on Trump's U-turn on the weapons leaves. So the Ukrainians themselves are voicing that they have some hope, but that they're cautious because, like I said earlier, this is the third time this stuff is flipped back and forth. But they shouldn't have any hope, folks. This is false hope. This is what I say is the most pernicious effect of this nonsense that we've been doing for so long now, for the majority of this. In fact, I would go so far as to say the entirety of this 3.5-year war, by giving hope to the Ukrainian people that just hang on a little bit longer, just fight a little bit more, and then things will turn around. No, they won't. They won't turn around, because whatever Trump does, it's going to be well more than overmatched by what the Russians continue to do. And you see that their stockpiles are obviously accelerating when they can afford to shoot, 500 here, 500 there, now 700 there. Reports say that it's going to go up to 1,000 per night total. Nobody has that kind of air defense capability. You're going to be saturating the skies and overwhelming, and then there's just nothing you can do. Everything that you need is going to continue to be exploited. And at some point, that's going to have a desperate and a death knell on the Ukraine side, because this is concurrent with what's going on the front lines. And there was continued moves overnight in the Sumy area, and in the Kupiansk area, and in the Zaporizhia area, also in the areas around the Pokrovsk area. Again, every day, there's continued going forward by the Russian side. Some days a lot, some days just a little bit, some days that they're just firing artillery and drones back and forth with no changes. But every day it's causing Ukrainian soldiers to be killed in action. And again, it's a zero-sum deal, and it's a loss. It's a net loss every single month. So if you see this as Ukrainians and say, we're going to be hopeful because Trump turned it back on, that's bad. Because there is this belief that we're feeding that it can make a difference. Washington Post is the biggest egregious violator of that. They listed all this stuff that, this can change the course. This can actually help Ukraine to be able to get their feet back on. It won't do any of those things. And there's graphic evidence over 3.5 years to prove it. You don't even have to take my word for it. Just look at the wreckage behind you, Washington Post, and then at least have the guts, I guess, to examine and say, okay, now if they give a few more missiles here, if they give a lot more missiles, if they go back to the Biden era stuff where they're just cleaning out the inventories that we got, what is that going to do? Because what is the other side of that calculation looking like? And what does Russia have here? And then how will that turn it around? That's what's missing. That's what's missing from any of this. There is none of that at the elite level. And yet they're the ones that are advocating giving our stuff away. And I'm telling you right now, if we get into a fight somewhere, we will not have enough of the ammunition we have to sustain combat, and we don't have the industrial capacity to sustain it over time. It simply doesn't exist. It physically doesn't exist. We don't have the stockpiles, and we don't have the defense capacity. So we are making ourselves very, very strategically vulnerable. That is a fact, ladies and gentlemen. That is not an opinion. That is a fact. Demonstrable, mathematical, it's a fact. The best thing the United States can do right now is to get this war off the table at whatever cost, frankly, because we have to defend ourselves. We have to make sure that America can defend itself if we are attacked by somebody, because this signals big time weakness. It signals that we don't know what we're doing, number one, and that may make somebody think they can take advantage of us. And that somebody who's, I don't know, who has the capacity, whether Russia or China, to be able to sustain conflict, because China has learned the lessons and they do have the industrial capacity, probably as much as Russia, maybe even more. In some categories, they have definitely more. In the missiles, they have foreseen this for a long time, and their capacity to produce missiles of all different categories is substantial, and ours is minuscule. Ours is designed to keep the industrial capacity high, the military industrial capacity happy, by keeping on with these super expensive missiles and whatever at a relatively modest rate, which just keeps them in these companies. I mean, they love it because it's a good business model. And part of me doesn't blame them, because they're just in business to make money. That's what they do. So they're going to maximize their ability to make money. That means they're going to send out people to lobby Congress. They're going to make commercials that talk about how they're defending America, whatever, to maximize this, to keep the status quo going so that they keep getting more and more money and their profits just go through the roof. So they're happy with that. Problem is, that's not how you can fight a war. As Russia learned, its pain in the first year and a half is what it took them to get back into order. It appears that the Chinese side has learned it. And God forbid that we should get in war with any of them, but this makes it more likely because they're aware of how weak we are. And God help us all if they should ever take the decision to actually act on that. I hope that they don't. It still wouldn't be in their interest to do so, I don't believe, because the cost to them would still be high. It's not like we're defenseless and they don't have any teeth. We do. We still have a lot of power and a lot of ability to cause harm. It's just not enough to win a war, and it's not enough to prevent a loss. So it could come at a large cost there, and the global economy would just be devastated if something like that were to happen. So there's reason for them not to do it, and I hope they don't. But the problem is our security is basically contingent upon somebody else not doing something that we don't want them to do, not because we have the deterrent capacity to knock them away from thinking about doing it, which used to be the case. It was the case in the distant past. It's not the case now. That's why I'm so aggravated about this and why I'm so animated, because this is harming American national defense. It is not helping it, folks. It is not helping it. You need to know that. We'll see what happens from here forward. We're going to keep monitoring all of these things here. And of course, every day that, the war gets closer to an unpleasant conclusion. And we'll see if President Trump finally wakes up and says, all right, this is a losing proposition. He's done that in the past. Let's hope he does it in the present. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.